So the agenda for today's session, mainly I will be covering what is a privilege account, why a PAM is required, how do your organization benefit from a PAM, where does a PAM fit in, how do you implement a PAM successfully, and what the industry analysts have to say. Just to give a brief overview on Intertec, Intertec system is 29 years old in the Middle East. We have offices across the GCC. We have our local and offshore NOC centers. So we have an NOC in Dubai as well as back in India. We also have software development centers back in India. We have a qualified team of 400 plus technical engineers within our offices. So that's just a brief on Intertec. I'll just go through the presentations without any further delay. So what do you understand by a privileged account? Okay, so in classification, there are two types of accounts. One is the user account and one is an administrator account. So any account which has a privilege more than a user account, that is any account which has a privilege that has additional privileges for having other than user access. That is his day-to-day activities is performed by a user account. Any additional thing he wants to do is done through something called a privilege account. So he needs additional permissions to do this task. So such accounts are called a privilege account. So privilege accounts might be used to do multiple things. So if you have seen in your laptops or your desktops, when you install a software, it says that you need an administrator privilege to install the software on this machine. So that means it is actually requesting you to have additional privileges provided to that account so that key resources of the operating system are accessible to the account. Okay, so that's a privileged account. So what are the types of privilege accounts we see around? The most common is the root or the administrator account. This account has unlimited privileges. It's like the master or the super user of the account. So he can have 100% privileges to add a user or to create or destroy anything on the machine. So that's a root or administrator. Then we have something called service accounts. So service accounts are those accounts which are used by applications to access other applications or other databases. So when you are developing a software, if you have a two-tier architecture basically, so you have an application server and a database server. So how does the application server access the database server? It's through a privileged username password. Okay, so this is called a service account. So this account is majorly used only by the application to access some features of other applications or other databases. Then you have something called systems accounts. So system accounts are used for running the operating system components or monitoring or other related components to that. So why do we require a PAM? So as you are already aware, when you have a strict password policy set for any of the passwords, for example, your Active Directory username password or any of the social media accounts, it's difficult for a person to manage these username passwords. So what we all end up doing is we use common passwords so that we remember the same and we don't miss the passwords. So the challenge with such passwords is that it can be commonly known or somebody can even guess out the passwords. Okay, so this is the main challenge which are there. Employees are the biggest threat. So you are actually giving your full rights of a device or a system to an employee who will in turn share it with another employee or a vendor whom he has a support from, which is a shared super user. So you don't have an accountability or control or visibility on what or who is doing any activity through this account. It is said from industry analysts that 96% of breaches were unavoidable through simple or intermediate controls. So you could have avoided 96% of the attacks or breaches through just controlling the privilege of users. Compliance demands a password vault. So any compliance, if you talk about something like a SOX or PCI or HIPAA compliance, they all talk about a password vault. So what is a password vault is like? All privilege account passwords are stored at a common location which is secure. Okay, so this secure location is easier to protect for you because you have everything in a common location. You don't have it split across multiple devices. So this password vault is a highly encrypted vault nobody can hack into. Control of privilege accounts must be complemented by a complete audit trial. So not only do you need to control the access from users, you need to have a complete audit trial as per any of the compliances. So basically, somebody is doing any configuration change or any changes or any removals or any configuration changes are being done on any of your systems, there has to be a complete audit trial on who has done it, for what, and when did he do it. Hard-coded passwords in applications and scripts presents an unnecessary security vulnerability. So what does that say? So some of the applications which are homegrown or a smaller application vendor has developed an application for you, the chances are that the application has hard-coded usernames and passwords to access other applications or other databases. So this is like a password which is permanently set. This is not being changed or accessed by anybody. But this password is available with whoever has developed the application. So he can use this privilege account to actually manipulate data or destroy data. Managing custom application using connectors. So you have a lot of custom applications which are developed in the environment throughout the life cycle of any process. So you have developed a BPM or a audit process internally where an application is doing all this stuff. So how do you manage the password for this application? Now, you cannot integrate directly with Active Directory because there are limitations with the application since it is homegrown. So to ensure that these passwords are regularly maintained, you need to have a connector which changes the password. Last point is auto discovery of systems and accounts. So if you see any of your critical resources, you can see that there are a lot of users which have been created. You have no clue on any of these accounts are still being used, why this was created, by whom, or is what level of privilege each of these accounts are having. So you need a process to completely discover what accounts are there in the system and what privileges do they own. So what are the benefits you get from a PAM? So PAM basically refers to a class of solutions which help you secure, control, manage, and monitor privilege access to critical assets. So what is a critical asset basically? So a critical asset can be anything which is related to your core data center infrastructure. It can be a server, it can be a virtual machine, it can be a firewall or a switch, any network device. So these are your critical resources which are to be protected. So PAM typically takes the credentials of privilege accounts and put them inside a secure repository. So what a PAM basically does is it collects all the privilege account from all these devices which are called your critical assets, stores it in a common place called the vault, which is the highly encrypted password manager. System administrators need to go through the PAM system to access any key assets, thus safeguard the privileged passwords. So any administrator who wants to access any of these critical assets need to go through the PAM so that he has a right access to the critical asset. So this password is no longer maintained by the administrator. The administrator logs in with his username password and then he is given a privilege which is already set for him. So the loss of passwords happening is a very bleak chance. By centralizing credentials in one place, PAM systems can ensure you a high level of security and control. Since you have all critical passwords stored in one single location, the areas you need to protect or the attack surface is very small. So you can actually have a lot of control put into the protection of this system, which is the password vault. So what do you term as a minimum features which should be provided by a PAM solution? So there are some features which industry analysts classify as features which PAM need to have. One is a secure vault supporting multiple types of authentication. So secure vault is where you store different passwords. So it has to support multiple authentications, right? So it has to support your firewalls, it has to support your switches, it has to support Windows machines, Linux machines. So whatever authentication mechanisms are thrown at it, so it has to support that so that the password is provided at the right time. Credential and password rotation. So if somebody is manually setting passwords, what happens is this has a chance of getting leaked. So a PAM solution should be able to rotate passwords by its own so that nobody has control on the passwords. Only the PAM system maintains the actual administrative level passwords of any of the critical resources. Session recording and live session monitoring. So we were discussing on the audit trails part. So any session which is being happening from an administrator or a user to one of the critical resources has to be recorded and logged, so that any changes which happen you can trace back to who has done it and when and for what. So all these audit trails will be available on the recording session. Keystroke login. So this is also important for CLI based applications. So any applications which are logging in through CLI, you need to have a recording or a keystroke management on what is entered as a command and how what the output of the command was. Privilege threat analytics. So this is basically a feature where the system itself identifies if a user is trying to do something different than what he does usually. So given an example, a guy who usually logs into the firewall, you can consider me as the administrator. So Likhit is logging to the firewall every day from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. He does monitoring, he does few changes on the policies. That's his normal schedule. But what happens when suddenly he is logging in at 10 p.m. He is trying to change the complete access policies and things. This is a behavior which is not usual to the user. So this is actually a threat. This has to be monitored and controlled, and somebody has to be informed that Likhit is logging at an odd time and he is making major changes to the system. So that is something an analytics tool does on the PAM solution. Securing passwords in applications and scripts. So as we said, there are system passwords or there are